Kazakhstan, officially the Republic of Kazakhstan, is a transcontinental country in northern Central Asia and Eastern Europe. Kazakhstan is the world's largest landlocked country, and the ninth largest in the world, with an area of 2,724,900 square kilometers. Kazakhstan is the dominant nation of Central Asia economically, generating 60% of the region's GDP, primarily through its oil, gas industry. Kazakhstan has vast mineral resources. It shares borders with Russia, China, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan, and also adjoins a large part of the Caspian Sea. The terrain of Kazakhstan includes flatlands, steppe, taiga, rock canyons, hills, deltas, snow-capped mountains, and deserts. Kazakhstan has an estimated 18 million people as of 2014. Given its large land area, its population density is among the lowest, at less than 6 people per square kilometer. The capital is Astana, where it was moved in 1997 from Almaty, the country's largest city. The territory of Kazakhstan has historically been inhabited by nomadic tribes. This changed in the 13th century, when Genghis Khan occupied the country as part of the Mongolian Empire. Following internal struggles among the conquerors, power eventually reverted to the nomads. By the 16th century, the Kazakh emerged as a distinct group, divided into 3 juz. The Russians began advancing into the Kazakh steppe in the 18th century, and by the mid-19th century, they nominally ruled all of Kazakhstan as part of the Russian Empire. Following the 1917 Russian Revolution and subsequent civil war, the territory of Kazakhstan was reorganized several times. In 1936, it was made the Kazakh Soviet Socialist Republic, part of the Soviet Union. Kazakhstan was the last of the Soviet republics to declare independence following the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. The current president, Nursultan Nazarbayev, has been leader of the country since then, and is characterized as authoritarian, with a government history of human rights abuses and suppression of political opposition. Kazakhstan has worked to develop its economy, especially its dominant hydrocarbon industry. Human Rights Watch says that Kazakhstan heavily restricts freedom of assembly, speech, and religion, and other human rights organizations regularly describe Kazakhstan's human rights situation as poor. Kazakhstan's 131 ethnicities include Kazakhs, Russians, Uzbeks, Ukrainians, Germans, Tatars, and Uyghurs. Islam is the religion of about 70% of the population, with Christianity practiced by 26%. Kazakhstan officially allows freedom of religion, but religious leaders who oppose the government are suppressed. The Kazakh language is the state language, and Russian has equal official status for all levels of administrative and institutional purposes. Etymology. The name Kazakh comes from the ancient Turkish word guaz, to wander, reflecting the Kazakhs' nomadic culture. The name Cossack is of the same origin. The Persian suffix stan means land or place of, so Kazakhstan can be literally translated as land of the wanderers, though traditionally referring only to ethnic Kazakhs, including those living in China, Russia, Turkey, Uzbekistan, and other neighboring countries. The term Kazakh is increasingly being used to refer to any inhabitant of Kazakhstan, including non-Kazakhs. History. Kazakhstan has been inhabited since the Neolithic age. The region's climate and terrain are best suited for nomads practicing pastoralism. Archaeologists believe that humans first domesticated the horse in the region's vast steppes. Central Asia was originally inhabited by the Scythians. Kazakh Khanate the Cuman entered the steppes of modern-day Kazakhstan around the early 11th century, where they later joined with the Kipchak and established the vast Cuman-Kipchak Confederation, while ancient cities Taraz and Hazrati Turkestan had long served as important way stations along the Silk Road connecting Asia and Europe. True political consolidation began only with the Mongol invasion of the early 13th century. Under the Mongol Empire, the largest in world history, administrative districts were established. These eventually came under the rule of the emergent Kazakh Khanate. Throughout this period, traditional nomadic life and a livestock-based economy continued to dominate the steppe. In the 15th century, a distinct Kazakh identity began to emerge among the Turkic tribes, a process which was consolidated by the mid-16th century with the appearance of the Kazakh language, culture, and economy. Nevertheless, the region was the focus of ever-increasing disputes between the native Kazakh emirs and the neighboring Persian-speaking peoples to the south. At its height, the Khanate would rule parts of Central Asia and control Cumania. The Kazakhs nomads would raid people of Russian territory for slaves until the Russian conquest of Kazakhstan. By the early 17th century, the Kazakh Khanate was struggling with the impact of tribal rivalries, which had effectively divided the population into the Great, Middle, and Little hordes. Political disunion, tribal rivalries, and the diminishing importance of overland trade routes between East and West weakened the Kazakh Khanate. Khiva Khanate used this opportunity and annexed Mangyshlak Peninsula. Uzbek rule that lasted 2 centuries until the Russian arrival. During the 17th century, Kazakhs fought Oirats, a federation of western Mongol tribes, including the Dzunga. The beginning of the 18th century marked the zenith of the Kazakh Khanate. During this period, the Little Horde participated in the 1723–1730 war against the Dzunga. Following their great disaster invasion of Kazakh territories, under the leadership of Abulkhair Khan, the Kazakh won major victories over the Dzunga at the Bulanti River in 1726, and at the Battle of Anrakai in 1729. Abulkhair Khan participated in the most significant battles against the Dzunga from the 1720s to the 1750s, for which he was declared a batter by the people. The Kazakhs suffered from the frequent raids against them by the Volga Kami. The Kokand Khanate used the weakness of Kazakh Jews after Dzunga and Karmic raids and conquered present southeastern Kazakhstan, including Almaty, the formal capital, in the first quarter of the 19th century. Also, the Emirate of Bukhara ruled Shymkent before the Russians took dominance. Russian Empire. In the 19th century, the Russian Empire began to expand its influence into Central Asia. The Great Game period is generally regarded as running from approximately 1813 to the Anglo-Russian Convention of 1907. The Tsars effectively ruled over most of the territory belonging to what is now the Republic of Kazakhstan. The Russian Empire introduced a system of administration and built in military garrisons and barracks in its effort to establish a presence in Central Asia in the so-called Great Game for dominance in the area against the British Empire, which was extending its influence from the south in India and Southeast Asia. Russia built its first outpost, Orsk, in 1735. Russia introduced the Russian language in all schools and governmental organizations. Russian efforts to impose its system aroused the resentment by the Kazakh people, and by the 1860s, some Kazakh resisted Russia's rule. It had disrupted the traditional nomadic lifestyle and livestock-based economy, and people were suffering from hunger and starvation, with some Kazakh tribes being decimated. The Kazakh national movement, which began in the late 19th century, sought to preserve the native language and identity by resisting the attempts of the Russian Empire to assimilate and stifle them. For the 1890s onward, ever larger numbers of settlers from the Russian Empire began colonizing the territory of present-day Kazakhstan, in particular the province of Semirichi. The number of settlers rose still further once the Trans-Aral Railway from Orenburg to Tashkent was completed in 1906. Especially created Migration Department in St. Petersburg oversaw and encouraged the migration to expand Russian influence in the area. During the 19th century, about 400,000 Russians immigrated to Kazakhstan, and about 1 million Slavs, Germans, Jews, and others immigrated to the region during the first third of the 20th century. The vassal Balabanov was the administrator responsible for the resettlement during much of this time. The competition for land and water that ensued between the Kazakh and the newcomers caused great resentment against colonial rule during the final years of Tsarist Russia. The most serious uprising, the Central Asian Revolt, occurred in 1916. The Kazakh attacked Russian and Cossack settlers and military garrisons. The revolt resulted in a series of clashes and in brutal massacres committed by both sides. Both sides resisted the communist government until late 1919. Soviet Union. Although Kazakhstan experienced a brief period of autonomy during the tumultuous period following the 1917 collapse of the Russian Empire, the Kazakhs eventually succumbed to Soviet rule. In 1920, the area of present-day Kazakhstan became an autonomous republic within the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. Soviet repression of the traditional elite, along with forced collectivization in the late 1920s and 1930s, brought famine and high fatalities, leading to unrest. The Kazakh population declined by 38% due to starvation and mass emigration. Estimates suggest that the population of Kazakhstan would be closer to 28 to 35 million if there had been no starvation or emigration of the Kazakh. During the 1930s, many renowned Kazakh writers, thinkers, poets, politicians and historians were killed on Stalin's orders, both as part of the Great Purge and as a methodical pattern of suppressing Kazakh identity and culture. Soviet rule took hold, and a communist apparatus steadily worked to fully integrate Kazakhstan into the Soviet system. In 1936, Kazakhstan became a Soviet republic. Millions of political prisoners and undesired ethnic groups were internally exiled to Kazakhstan from other parts of the Soviet Union during the 1930s and 1940s. Many of the deportation victims were deported to Siberia or Kazakhstan merely due to their ethnic heritage or beliefs. For example, after the German invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, the Soviets transported approximately 400,000 Volga Germans from Western Russia to Kazakhstan in September 1941. Deportees were interned in some of the biggest Soviet labor camps of the Gulag system, including Alt-Zir camp outside Astana, which was reserved for the wives of men considered enemies of the people. Many moved due to the policy of population transfer in the Soviet Union, and others were forced into involuntary settlements in the Soviet Union. The Kazakh Soviet Socialist Republic contributed 5 national divisions to the Soviet Union's World War II effort. In 1947, 2 years after the end of the war, the USSR founded its Semipalatinsk test site, the main national nuclear weapon test site, near the city of Semi. World War II led to an increase in industrialization and mineral extraction in support of the war effort. At the time of Soviet leader Joseph Stalin's death in 1953, however, Kazakhstan still had an overwhelmingly agriculturally based economy. In 1953, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev initiated the ambitious Virgin Lands program to turn the traditional pasture lands of Kazakhstan into a major grain-producing region for the Soviet Union. The Virgin Lands policy brought mixed results. However, along with later modernizations under Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev, it accelerated the development of the agricultural sector. which remains the source of livelihood for a large percentage of Kazakhstan's population. Because of the decades of privation, war and resettlement, by 1959 the Kazakh had become a minority in the country, making up 30% of the population. Ethnic Russians accounted for 43%. In the late 20th century, growing tensions within Soviet society led to an appetite for political and economic reforms, which came to a head in the 1980s. A factor that contributed strongly to this was Lavrentiy Berya's decision to test a nuclear bomb on the territory of Kazakh SSR in Semi in 1949. This had catastrophic ecological and biological consequences that were felt generations later, and Kazakh anger toward the Soviet system escalated. In December 1986, mass demonstrations by young ethnic Kazakhs, later called the Jeltokzan riot, took place in Almaty to protest the replacement of the first secretary of the Communist Party of the Kazakh SSR Dinmak Konayev with Gennady Kulban from the Russian SFSR. Governmental troops suppressed the unrest. Several people were killed, and many demonstrators were jailed. In the waning days of Soviet rule, discontent continued to grow and found expression under Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev's policy of glasnost. Independence on 16 December 1991. Kazakhstan became the last Soviet republic to declare independence. Its communist-era leader, Nursultan Nazarbayev, became the country's first president, a position he has since retained. Kazakhstan declared its sovereignty as a republic within the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics in October 1990. Following the August 1991 aborted coup attempt in Moscow and the subsequent dissolution of the Soviet Union, Kazakhstan declared independence on 16 December 1991. Nazarbayev has ruled in an authoritarian manner, which many believed was needed in the first years of independence. Emphasis was on converting to a market economy. Political reforms have lagged behind achievements in the economy. By 2006, Kazakhstan generated 60% of the GDP of Central Asia, primarily through its oil industry. The government moved the capital in 1997 from Almaty, established under the Soviet Union and now Kazakhstan's largest city, to Astana. In 2011, Switzerland confiscated $48 million in Kazakh assets from Swiss bank accounts, as a result of a bribery investigation in the United States. U.S. officials believe the funds represented bribes paid by American officials to Kazakh officials in exchange for oil or prospecting rights in Kazakhstan. Proceedings eventually involved $84 million in the U.S. and another $60 million U.S. in Switzerland. Geography, as it extends across both sides of the Ural River, considered the dividing line with the European continent. Kazakhstan is one of only two landlocked countries in the world that has territory in two continents, with an area of 2,700,000 square kilometers, equivalent in size to Western Europe. Kazakhstan is the ninth largest country and largest landlocked country in the world. While it was part of the Soviet Union, Kazakhstan lost some of its territory to China's Xinjiang Autonomous Region and some to Uzbekistan's Karakalpakstan Autonomous Republic. It shares borders of 6,846 kilometers with Russia, 2,203 kilometers with Uzbekistan, 1,533 kilometers with China, 1,051 kilometers with Kyrgyzstan, and 379 kilometers with Turkmenistan. Major cities include Astana, Almaty, Karaganda, Shymkent, Atyrau and Oskmen. It lies between latitudes 40 degrees and 56 degrees north, and longitudes 46 degrees and 88 degrees east. While located primarily in Asia, a small portion of Kazakhstan is also located west of the Urals in Eastern Europe. Kazakhstan's terrain extends west to east from the Caspian Sea to the Altai Mountains and north to south from the plains of western Siberia to the oases and deserts of Central Asia. The Kazakh steppe, with an area of around 804,500 square kilometers, occupies one-third of the country and is the world's largest dry steppe region. The steppe is characterized by large areas of grasslands and sandy regions. Major seas, lakes and rivers include the Aral Sea, Lake Balkhash and Lake Zaysan, the Charon River and Gorge and the Irtysh-Ishim, Ural and Syr-Darya rivers. The climate is continental, with warm summers and colder winters. Precipitation varies between arid and semi-arid conditions. The Charon Canyon is 80 kilometers long, cutting through a red sandstone plateau and stretching along the Charon River Gorge in northern Tian Shan east of Almaty at 43.3503222 degrees north, 79.0803556 degrees east, 43.3503222, 79.0803556. The steep canyon slopes, columns and arches rise to heights of between 150 and 300 meters. The inaccessibility of the canyon provided a safe haven for a rare ash tree Fraxinus sogdiana that survived the Ice Age and is now also grown in some other areas. Bigger crater at 48.500 degrees north, 82.000 degrees east, 48.500 82.000 is a Pliocene-Miocene asteroid impact crater, 8 kilometers in diameter and estimated to be 5 ± 3 million years old. Administrative divisions. Kazakhstan is divided into 14 regions. The regions are subdivided into districts. The cities of Almaty and Astana have state importance, and do not belong to any region. The city of Baikonur has a special status because it is being leased until 2050 to Russia for the Baikonur Cosmodrome. Each region is headed by an Akim appointed by the president. Municipal Akims are appointed by region Akims.